I need you to knock some sense into me. I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I don't know.
I enjoy listening to you. I don't always agree with everything.
All right, enough of this persiflage.
So, you want my question?
I'm certainly not going to get myself in trouble by telling you what to do.
That makes great sense. Gosh, that's good.
Did I overwhelm you with words and wisdom?
I've got 7 kids. I feel like I could call you every day.
Wait, you're telling me I'm wrong? Disconnect.
Yes, I am, Dr. Ray.
You just need to tune in to Dr. Ray, honey. He's got all the answers.
Am I right or am I right?
Probably.
Now, from the studios of Living Bread Radio Network in Canton, Ohio, the hometown of Mother Angelica, here's Dr. Ray.
Avoiding all known forms of psychobabble. Lowest ratings by the EPA, the Environmental Psychological Association, of psychobabble is 1.8% per show. Some ask, why isn't it 0? Because remember when you used to have these old-time, I guess they don't even do that much anymore. They have the radar, the weather radar, and they would point out, well, that's ground clutter. In the cities, you could see these big green blobs, and that wasn't rain, that was ground clutter. It was the radar was bouncing off of that. Well, they don't do that anymore because the radar is more sophisticated, but it was kind of like verbal clutter, the 1.8%. You know, if you say something like, I'm hearing you. Well, that could be interpreted as psychobabble, but if somebody says, is my phone coming through clearly? And I say, I'm hearing you, that could be interpreted both ways. Just enough said. This is ePerson Monday, where I attempt to answer some of the e-persons that come in. I don't call them email. As I've said many, many times, that's rather patriarchal. And I don't want to get too toxic here. So I say e-person to kind of broaden it out. And by the way, I've just, as an aside, I know I'm just digressing, but I was in Mass the other day, and so many of these songs do not. If it says something about, in the first verse, God, and then in the second line it's His ways, or the way the original hymn was written, or if the hymn even more convolutedly is reflecting and repeating Scripture, it changes His to God's again. So every time God is mentioned, it's God. It's never His. Even if that's what it is in Scripture. Well, someone might say, well, God isn't male or female. That's true, of course. But if that's how He chose to communicate with us, then we say, well, he's kind of not really sensitive enough, you know. My. Okay, where are we now? My monologue. In a number of my books, particularly the marriage book, the How to Get Along with Almost Everybody book, the Thinking Like Jesus book, the subject of apologies in various contexts comes up. I make the observation that apology aversion, in other words, how tough it is to get those words out of your mouth, begins very young. It just begins young. Ask any parent who tries to get a little kid to apologize. You get a mumbling sorry maybe at the floor, at the shoes, or the kid closes his eyes. I'm sorry, I can't say his, that's male. He closes, the boy closes their eyes. See, you're allowed to do that now, by the way. You can use a plural pronoun referring back to a singular subject, making a nod to our sensitivity. He closes his eyes because he doesn't want to look at the person he's apologizing to. Now, what is it about I'm sorry that is not only difficult for adults, it's difficult for little kids? And parents will persuade, What do you say? What do you tell your sister for stepping on her crayons? What do you say? And the kid looks at you like, what do you mean, what do I say? I say I stepped on her crayons. What is the magic word here? And the kid just kind of holds out. Finally, the parent threatens discipline. You're going to sit until you're willing to say, I'm sorry. And then the kid ponders his options and he decides, okay, I got two options here. Forced boredom or forced apology. All right, I'll go with the apology. Now, the experts confuse things because so many experts, especially child development people, they say things like this. You do not require an apology because if the child doesn't feel appropriate feelings of remorse, then the words are empty. They mean nothing. It's just a blind acquiescence to what the big person wants. Don't they sound so intelligent if you just kind of read it in paper, but in real life it just kind of blows up? The wise philosophers, they had the right idea. You form the habit first. The feelings will follow. You say you're sorry first, and you get used to saying it. And then as you get older, you realize remorse goes with it. If you wait for remorse to go with it before you say I'm sorry, I don't know if you'll ever say I'm sorry. Because you got to somehow develop those feelings of remorse. Okay, that's it. I digressed. My son Andrew was, I don't know, probably about 4. We were visiting my uncle. We were talking. Myself and my uncle were talking and listening to old people talk, meaning me, including myself in there. It's pretty boring for a 4-year-old. Andrew started to amuse himself by spinning around in circles and flapping his arms. He looked like he was an ice skater doing a triple klutz. Those of you who know ice skating, it's called a triple lutz, but in Andrew's case, it was a triple klutz. And for whatever the reason, because he's a 4-year-old kid, because he's a kid, they just do impulsive stuff. For whatever the reason, I think around spin number 5 or 6, as he flailed his way past my uncle, he spit. Now, he missed. And it really wasn't a spit. It was a sounding spit. So at that point, I said, Andrew, you're going to need to apologize to Uncle Rich. And he looked at me like, who are you talking to? I see your lips moving, but I don't hear any sound coming out. I said, Andrew, go sit on the couch. When you're ready to apologize, you let me know. Well, he sat there. He just sat there. The rest of the visit, it was probably another half an hour. Dr. Ray, don't you realize it's only 1 minute per year of age and time out? He sat there for 30 minutes. Are you saying your son is 30 years old? No. I'm saying I gave him a choice. You know, you got to give choices. I gave him a choice. Apologize or sit. That was my choice. Well, he didn't. So we left. We got home. I said, Andrew, back on the couch, son. Let me know when you want to apologize to Uncle Rich. Well, he must have suspected that I meant business because about a minute later he says, okay. All right, son, I'll call Uncle Rich. So I called him. I said, Uncle Rich, Andrew has something he wants to tell you. I gave the phone to Andrew and put it up to his ear, and as soon as he heard my uncle's voice, that was it. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the receiver. So after about 10, 15 seconds of that, I'm not going to sit there and go, Andrew, what do you say? No, that's never been part of my parenting. I'm not going to badger you. So I took the phone and I said, Uncle Rich, he's apparently not ready yet, so if you don't mind, I'll call you again. He was cool about it. So Andrew went and sat down, and I could see his little wheels spinning. This is not working out the way I planned. My dad is not allowing me to get out of this without saying sorry. Okay? So, once again, a minute or so later, Andrew says, okay, Dad, I'll talk to Uncle Rich. Okay. Call Uncle Rich. Andrew said, sorry, Uncle Rich. And then I said, What were you sorry for, Andrew? Sorry for spitting. Okay, son. Good job. There you go, Uncle Rich. Now, my uncle, he was older at the time, and he said, "Oh, you didn't need to have him do that, Ray." I said, "Yeah. Well, I think he needs to know when he does something wrong. It's proper. When you realize it was wrong, you the very first step is you apologize for it." Okay. Now, what's my point? What is it about "I'm sorry" that sticks in the throat? Even with little kids. With grown-ups, you can say, well, there's emotions attached to it. It's kind of a threat to self-image. Maybe it's they don't think they were wrong. There's all kinds of reasons why they don't want to apologize. Well, for a little kid, what is it? What innately is a resistance to apologizing? There's something about that vulnerability, that ability to admit I was wrong, that somehow has this negative tone to it. And it has to be overcome as you get older. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of big people who haven't overcome it. And there ain't nobody to make them sit on the couch until they apologize. Dr. Ray.
Looking for a retreat venue for your youth group, sports team, ministry, or staff event? St. Francis Retreat Center in DeWitt sits on a picturesque 95-acre property, complete with 3 large conference rooms, 2 chapels, 2 dining rooms with commercial kitchens, meeting spaces for smaller groups, overnight lodging, and a professional staff to make your event a success. Call 517-669-8321 or visit stfrancis.ws to book your event today.
Steve and Janet Ray here, announcing we are back in the Holy Land, ready to introduce you to our favorite places in the world, the land where God walked. Mass at the most holy sites, pray the mysteries of the Rosary where they happened, and experience the Bible in vivid color. We have led over 100 groups through this land, sharing the whole story of salvation. Of all the pilgrimages in all of the world, this is the one you should not miss.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at AveMariaRadio.net.
This week on Christ is the Answer, Father John talks about the dignity of the human person. Each of us has been given life by our God. When a man and a woman are joined together physically and emotionally in love, a new life is the result. But for some, this new life is a burden that they do not want. Don't miss this week as Father John addresses the culture's views on the unborn and the hope for healing when we are all open to the dignity of our fellow man. Tune in for Christ is the Answer, Monday through Fridays at 11 a.m. on Ave Maria Radio.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866 Ave Maria or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
I had a language professor, he taught linguistics when I was in college, who said that it was humans' ability to use language that makes us the dominant species on this planet. And I thought even then, that could be, but I think there's one other thing that separates us from animals. And I noticed that with my Rottweiler. We aren't afraid of vacuum cleaners. Well, I'm a little ill at ease with a vacuum cleaner, if you know what I mean. All right, see what we got here. This is from a delightful woman who is a long time listener to this program. She's very kind to me in many, many ways. And she calls me Dr. Bob. After listening to you on an earlier show, here's a story for you. Yeah, this is probably alluding to the topic of adoption that came up. When I was 19, I was engaged to be married. I was a Christian, but I didn't go to church much. After refusing to get physical about 20 times, I finally gave in. A month later, I decided I was too young to be married, so I broke off the engagement. A bit later, I noticed I was looking chubbier every day. My mother noticed this too. She asked me about it. Yes, it turned out that I was pregnant. And I wasn't about to be married because of that. That was in 1967. My mother was very upset. At that time, you have to understand that was much, much less common. 1967, out of wedlock birth rates were under 10%. At first, she said we would have to move. Or whatever the thinking was in those days. It turned out we didn't move, and I lived with my parents. I asked them twice during my pregnancy if I could keep the baby. My mother said no. But she was kind about it. We were good friends and did not have a bad relationship. But we set it up for me to place the baby for adoption. However, when I was in the hospital after the baby was born, my mom called and told me we could keep the baby and that she and my father would help me to raise him. My son, who is now 57, became her favorite grandson. Goes to show how something unforeseen like this can turn out good. Thank you, dear friend. Thank you, dear friend. All right, let's see what else we got here. I need help getting my teenage daughters to stop fighting. Now, I'm wondering what kind of fighting. You know, okay. So she goes on to say it. Usually it involves yelling and sometimes resorts to slapping each other. I try to help this out by going into their room and mediating. Well, that, I think in most cases, that's not going to help it out, especially if it's a prolonged history. They've been doing this for a year or two or 3 or 4. I'd like for my kids and I to receive some help from family counseling. So I gave them some referrals in that area, but I'd like to talk a little bit about this idea of these daughters basically mistreating each other. And I wrestle a lot with, I don't call it sibling quibbling. I don't call it sibling rivalry. Sibling rivalry makes it sound like it's some kind of natural psychological process that these kids living in the same domicile are going to innately have struggles because they're wired to have struggles. I call it sibling quibbling because I think it's more accurately explained by two partially socialized, partially moralized human beings living under the same roof pursuing self-interest. And therefore they're going to potentially battle. Now in this case, this is not a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old bickering, doing what 6-year-olds and 4-year-olds have to be taught out of. These are teenagers. Now I don't know the ages, but my guess would be it's probably early mid-teens. I'm hoping it's not 18, 19 doing this. Now, why do parents permit this? Now, mom gives you some glimpse into this by saying, well, I try to mediate, I try to separate them, et cetera, et cetera. But effectively, they continue to do it. One of the reasons I think parents are slow to get involved or slow to put consequences on it is that the experts have told you children need to solve their own problems. They need to learn conflict resolution skills. A parent is a facilitator, maybe, but by and large, the children need to come to their own solutions. which is really bad advice because the dominant child is going to win. And the dominant child is not always the older child. The younger child could be feistier. So unless the kids are pretty much equal in age, size, temperament, IQ, cooperativeness, solving their own problems doesn't work too well. Somebody's going to get hurt, if not verbally, physically. I would ask Mom if she were in my office, Mom, what do you do about this when they mistreat each other? What do you do? Now, obviously, they know you don't want them to do this. And somewhere down deep, they may know what they're doing is not good. It's wrong. You don't treat your sister this way. But here's the problem with that. The more you are allowed to mistreat the other person, one, it becomes a habit, but two, they'll mistreat you back. So therefore, you now have justification in mistreating them because look how they treat me. It's something that can get essentially on a roll-like habit. Mom will say in situations like this, well, sometimes I take privileges away. Sometimes I make them go to their rooms. Often what happens is that it's a high-frequency misbehavior. It happens a lot. 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 times a day on a bad day. And typically when you have a high-frequency misbehavior, the tendency is to overlook or ignore the lower mistreatment. Yeah, they're just kind of calling each other a name or they're sort of yelling, get away from me, whatever. And you don't intervene on that because you don't figure it's mistreatment enough. But they start slapping each other. Okay, now I'm gonna go up there. So you see what happens? Only a small percentage of the time do you do anything about it. It has to reach the level of throwing bricks at each other. It's an easy, misguided habit to get pulled into. That you don't react, you don't discipline until it gets quote unquote serious. Or I've had enough. What if you established there is to be no mistreatment of a sibling of any kind? Tormenting, taunting, yelling, name-calling, and for sure nothing physical. None. If so, here's the consequence. Whatever you choose, 500-word essay of apology, handwritten, no privileges for a day, loss of smartphone. My guess would be they have smartphones. Now, if you do that, you're going to get heavy resistance because I don't know how long this behavior is going on, but probably a while. And once you say, okay, now we're going to establish a very clear-cut rule about this, and I'm going to enforce it. Kids don't like that. It's like you're changing the terms of the engagement. And they resist it. They fight the essay, or they really fight losing their phone. But Mom has to decide, what am I going to do about this? I referred her to my book, Standing Strong. Good discipline makes great teams. Thank you so much for joining me here. I'm Dr. Ray Guarendi, program Doctors In. Particular variant, E-Person Monday. My producer, man, Andrew Kruchek over there in Ann Arbor, co-production, along with the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. This is a rather generic question. It comes up so very, very often. I've talked about it a lot. I am interested in the topic of adult children who disconnect or cut ties with parents. I heard you on AM radio in Detroit. Specifically, why is this happening? Obviously, to reiterate, the reasons are many, many, many. One of the common ones that I get a lot on this program, and I would imagine anybody within the Catholic world would hear this, priests probably hear it all the time. The older generation is by and large more religious than the younger generation. If you look at the statistics, it's very heavily borne out. If the younger generation moves away from religion, which a heavy percentage do, something like 40%, they don't relate to their parents' religion. They don't relate to their parents' moral values. They don't, in many respects, relate to their parents' political beliefs. So they, being uncomfortable around their parents, or believing their parents are throwback Neanderthals, or believing their parents are just judgmental bigots, whatever it is that they use to describe their parents, they believe they're better off with their parents out of their lives. Unfortunately, in no small number of cases, they've gone to therapy. And therapists have confirmed their inclination, which is if your parents ruin your peace, then the most important thing is to have peace, and you need to get rid of these peace ruiners. Now, the problem with that kind of reasoning is that you don't learn to tolerate. You don't learn to forgive. You don't learn to get along with people that you find harder to get along with, particularly your parents. I commented on an article on this program some weeks back. It's a scary article. A couple of psychologists said that they acknowledged that this was an epidemic. They acknowledged that this was happening. But their explanation for it was radically different than the fact that there's huge differences in the way the younger adults have come to view life through being shaped by the culture's dominant ideas and their parents, who were by and large more conservative or more religious, etc. And these psychologists said that it's a good thing that we're starting to recognize a much broader continuum of bad parenting. In other words, in past generations, yeah, you had to be pretty bad here, pretty abusive, pretty nasty, whatever, dysfunctional, to be tagged as a bad upbringing. Well, now, if it's you didn't quite meet my needs, you had rules I didn't like, you made me go to church, you didn't give me a smartphone until I was 14, whatever it is that the young adult decides was deficient parenting is now becoming reason enough to cut ties. And as I read the article, it sure sounded like that's what they were talking about, which is it's good that we've become more aware of all the ways that parents can literally screw up. One of the things I commonly tell parents as I try to understand the dynamics of the situation, as I understand, at least from what the parents are telling me, what the home life was like, etc., etc., and especially parents who have gone multiple times to these young adults or even middle-aged adults and said, sorry, we're so sorry, we didn't, whatever we did, we're sorry for. And a lot of times it was not offenses. And I said, do you realize what your offense was? What was it, Dr. A? Because they're thinking they're going to hear the words of the guru telling them how they fouled up. I'll say, your offense can be summarized in one word. Human. You were human. With all your frailties, with all your inconsistencies, with all your lack of whatever it was that the child accused you of, whether it be affection, whether it be communication skills, whatever it was. By and large, so many of these parents were not bad parents. They were human parents. But now, these adults, pushed by psychology, pushed by the culture, have decided it was just so bad that I got stuck with you. And that's particularly exaggerated when the kid is not leading their life well, when they're unhappy, when they've made bad marriage choices, when they're struggling, whether they're bouncing around socially, morally, emotionally, whatever. They turn to the parents as the cause of why they're struggling in life, as opposed to, maybe I should look at myself and see what kinds of decisions I'm making. Maybe I should look at myself now. No, they say, well, yeah, I'm doing that, but it's because of you. It's because of everything you did that fell short. If you were better at this, I wouldn't be so miserable in my adult life. I'd be fine. So therefore, I'm hostile toward you. That is, unfortunately, a common dynamic. I believe it's never been such a generational cleft in human history that you turn on your parents like this. Now, I understand there's bad parents, absolutely, and I've gotten radio calls and therapy. People come in and say, you don't understand, my parents were really, really, really bad. My dad was a drug user, my mom was alcoholic. I got all that. What I'm talking to is those parents who, in effect, were not pathological. They may not have parented the way the adult child thinks they should have, but that's quite a different story than being pathological or dysfunctional. And here's the other irony to this. Often it is only one of the kids. There's 4 siblings. One of them decides the parents aren't worthy of contact. The other 3 love their parents, which speaks to, one, the temperament, the personality of that estranged child, and it also speaks to the fact that this particular child was probably tougher to raise and went on making a lot of bad moves into adulthood for which they blamed. It's an interesting dynamic. I talk about it in a number of my books. It's Dr. Ray. Thank you so much for joining me here on The Doctor Is In. E-Person Monday, the variant of The Doctor Is In, where I scroll through and sometimes print out your e-persons that come in. My husband and I have not seen our grandchildren for 3 years. Now, this is kind of piggybacking. It's a variant of the previous e-person that I addressed before the break. Their parents want it this way. We do not. Now, she's basically saying what I alluded to, which is for whatever the reason the parents have decided, not only are we going to estrange ourselves from you, from the way you were, the way you are, but you're not going to see the grandkids. That's the big club. The big club. Now, okay, I know there are young adults listening to me that say, Dr. Ray, you don't understand. We had to separate from my parents. They undercut our parenting. We couldn't trust them. They wouldn't watch their language. I got all that. I understand that, and I know it can go in that direction. It's not a matter of automatically, because I'm an older parent, I side with the older parents. Nope. So given all that, I understand it goes both ways, but I'm addressing the situations where, from what I can ascertain, either through therapy or knowing, and some of these people I've known personally, I know who they are. They're in my life. So I know they're not bad people. Personal experience, long-standing personal experience. I've got a number of very close friends who have children who just have written them off. And they're both faith-filled Christian families. interestingly enough, the children have either left Christianity or are redefining it. All right. Now here's where her particular variance is. Facebook put out a post that Grandparents' Day is late January and you must register to attend. The parents will be mad if we go, but we really want to see our grandchildren. What do you suggest? I think you're taking a major risk by going. What that will look like is you will be saying, this is how it will be interpreted. I know your motive is we just so desperately want to see our grandchildren. And you want to say to your kids, don't you understand that? I believe they would interpret it this way. You don't care what we want. You're going to do whatever you have to do to defy us. Now, that's the first step. The second step is the more dangerous one, which is this just proves why we do what we do. You cannot be trusted to respect our wishes. You're going to find a way to get around it. See what I mean? This exactly just proves our point. That's what I think will happen. That's how I think it would be interpreted, that you don't care what they think. Now, you can say, if there's any kind of contact at this Grandparents' Day, you can say, that's not our motive. It's not our motive at all. We just wanted to see the grandkids. You can say that. And maybe, I'm not ruling it out, maybe the softer of the two spouses might say, okay, I can kind of understand that. I still don't agree with what they did, but I can kind of understand it. But the odds are against it. I think the odds would be you deliberately went against what we've wanted. Now, keep in mind now, they think they're justified in doing this. It is rare that someone who separates the grandkids from the grandparents thinks, their grandparents are good people, nice people, but I don't know. It just complicates our life. I don't want them to be around. No. They're doing this is because they think that you are, for some kind of ways, negative influences in their lives or on their children. They believe that. And you think to yourself, how could they believe that? Well, they do. Take it from a psychologist. People can pretty much believe anything. And they self-justify. What they're doing is not mean. It's not cruel. It's not irrational. It is something they need to do for their sakes and for the kids' sakes. Now, that's how they think. I'm sure of it. So, if you want my suggestion, I can't tell you what to do, but if my suggestion would be, if you go, you'll make it worse, and you'll probably prolong this estrangement. Some point they may soften. They may. But you'll make it longer if you go against their wishes. Dr. Ray.
Welcome to Advanced Dentistry Center family. This is Dr. Metti, and our team strives to treat you like family in a loving and compassionate way as we focus on serving you in a Christ-like manner. We do this by emphasizing prevention and general well-being for a lifetime. Our private practice is small, personal, state-of-the-art, and innovative, with the goal to educate and motivate our patients in improving their oral health. It is through a partnership with you that you will achieve the goals for your smile. Advanced Dentistry is serious about the level of care we provide, with attention to details and an exceptional level of care, skill, and judgment. We are thrilled for the opportunity to serve you.
Dr. Matty and the team invite you to visit them at advanceddentistrycenter.com or call them at 248-594-9592. That's 248-594-9592. AdvancedDentistryCenter.com.
The Heart of the Interior Life with Elizabeth Jingle.
Within the sixth rule of St. Ignatius of Loyola's 14 rules for the discernment of spirits, St. Ignatius of Loyola highlights the need for prayer when we are experiencing spiritual desolation. St. Ignatius invites us to change ourselves intensely against the desolation itself, as by insisting more upon prayer. Prayer is the first step in resisting spiritual desolation. In the interior storm of spiritual desolation, this first step, when one is perhaps feeling separated from their Lord and Creator, will often need to be done with intention. This very important and decisive step can become a turning point in rejecting spiritual desolation. Father Jules Toner wrote, "The first and most essential step in changing ourselves with the hope of conquering desolation is prayer. In this context, prayer of petition." What might be your prayer petition during spiritual desolation?
For more information, visit AveMariaRadio.net.
Welcome back to the Doctor Is In program. Now, here's your host, that master of mustaches, the punisher of pretzels, that cyclone of psychology, Dr. Ray Gorindy. Hit it, Jerry.
Got time for one more quick one. It is becoming harder these days to carry on a conversation without being laced with many curse words. Asking people to refrain from using this language has not worked. Well, I would imagine it would depend on which people you ask. Some might feel sheepish and say, okay, well, I didn't realize I bothered you that much. Okay, I'll stop, or I'll try to stop. Although given that it's such a habit, they're going to not be able to catch themselves all the time. Others will have an attitude of, who are you to tell me how to talk? I can talk the way I want. It's because you're a religious prude. One of the ways that their language won't bother you, if you have tried, and you said asking them has not worked, okay. Now, what's plan B? Plan B is to not take this, first of all, as a sign of disrespect for you. If you say, I don't need to hear that kind of language, I don't want to hear that kind of language, I'm taking it very personally. Don't. In the words of a youth pastor that I knew back when I was in the evangelical world, he went to buy a car, and the salesperson, his language was laced, rather saltily. At one point he asked the youth pastor, what do you do for a living? And he said, I'm a youth pastor. The guy said, oh man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my language. I didn't know you were a youth pastor. If I'd have known that, I'd have watched myself. And the youth pastor had a great line. He said, you don't have to worry about talking like that in front of me. Who am I? You're talking like that in front of God. So if you are upset because they are talking like that in front of God, well, first of all, God's a big boy. And a lot of sins, much worse than that, are committed before God. But the rationale holds. You don't take it personally for you, and you don't get yourself upset because, for whatever the reason, they don't care the way they talk. Now, some curse words are defined as curse words simply because they are coarse language. And at one time, they may not have been curse words, or at one time what would have been a curse word is not a curse word. Like we use the word bloody. Well, in England, that's a pretty strong curse word, but here it's not. Okay, so there's a certain level of linguistic fluctuation regarding curse words. Now, some words are pretty bad. They are pretty bad. And what is distressing is that some of these curse words have now just become not only part of everyday language, but part of language of what would be our leaders, what would be people who we would look to have some semblance of reasonable articulation. They've just swamped the culture. They've taken over the culture. I read a book called Demonic Foes about a guy named Gallagher. I think it was Richard Gallagher. He was a psychiatrist, and he's been consulting for 30-plus years on cases where there is demonic oppression, in other words, being tormented by a demon, or actual possession, which is rare but exists. He's called in initially to attempt to sort out, as the church has always advised, you rule out what could possibly be other explanations, particularly mental illness. So he was called in as a psychiatrist. If you read his book, he's a very knowledgeable guy. And what I noticed was over the years, he came across just many situations, either in his presence where he was during the particular exorcism, or talking to the priests. And even though he didn't say this definitively in the book, he didn't quote the demonic language. The demonic language was just full of the most pejoratively ugly curse words that they could possibly concoct. And one of the favorites, of course, was the F-bomb. I thought to myself, this seems to be a chosen language of demons. And by the way, if somebody says, Dr. A, come on, I thought you were beyond that kind of devil thing. Yeah, well, you don't really want to look into the evidence, the very powerful scientific evidence that this can happen, and the physical laws of nature are disobeyed by the demon through very reliable reports and sources. Even if I wish to be skeptical of it, I would have to be forced to say I'm ignoring what is clear evidence that something supernatural is going on here, because it is defying everything we know about the laws of nature. And it certainly is different from what someone who is severely mentally ill can do. Now, that all said, the language used, the chosen language used by the demons who speak through the person is heavily laced with the F-bomb. Heavily. And as I read about this, I thought, wow, in using that word so frequently, so freely, we are essentially adopting their language. If they want to use it to convey evil and disdain and assault and whatever ugliness they can conjure up to scare, we just kind of use it as an adjective or a verb or an adverb, a modifier throughout our language. That rattled me. It truly did. It rattled me. So in response to this person's question, I'd say obviously you have no choice but to recognize that this person is using this language, and there's not a whole lot you're going to do about it. Okay, gotta go, gotta run. Thank you so much for joining me here. Thanks, Andrew Kruchek, for all you do at that end of all this business. I appreciate it so very much. Walk with God. And, well, watch your language.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.